Hey DK, thank you for coming in. I mean, you really have a quite a marvelous background. I mean, your early life and with pursuing advanced education in law and policy and things like that. And of course, you got your affiliations with the top university in the actually in the ASEAN region, right? And then the tie-in with Harvard as well. And you get advanced degrees and things like also in economics. And you've done a lot of work founding and leading multiple law firms to in the corporate sector, serving as legal and tax counsel at Deutsche Bank, and handling complex kind of technology areas and things like that. It's very rare for somebody to have all of your background, and then general counsel for an ASEAN Business Association, and being within ASEAN secretary leadership, and we'll get into this in a lot more detail. And of course, ASEAN is such an important region of the world, right? Kind of like a bridge between all the different regions. And Singapore always takes a kind of a very balanced view. I would say almost like the Gulf states in a way, where they like to deal with every part of the world. And you have your global AI leadership and consultancy as global AI ambassador and president of the Singapore chapter. And again, lead a lot of work on public policy, but also with a tech kind of piece to it. And then you're definitely an expert in the European whole AI Act and what it means, because you advise on it, the impact in AI on defense technology, and of course, an expert in in dispute resolution. You continue to have your time academically, lecturing at NUS, which is the top university and I should say in Singapore, but actually ranked in the world as well. And also with the Singapore Cyber Defense Academy, and but you also have a UN kind of work as well. Contributing. You can see that in your background there, UNCTAD and SCAP, and policy, and also in Council for the Underprivileged, and working with them. So really, really quite unusual and very unique, and really a global leading expert in so many different areas. So thank you for coming in and agreeing to kind of share some of your experience with our audience.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Stefan. Thank you very much for having me on this program. Thank you very much indeed for your kind words.
So
Yeah,
TK,
so
you have this really thorough and amazing background. You're very active. Definitely, you execute. In other words, you take something on and you do something. A lot of people talk, but they don't do anything. You're one of those outstanding leaders that executes, and you're a servant leader as well. You just try to help. And so, what were those maybe three, maybe even four inflection points in your life that made you who you are today? And it could have been when you were 3 or 5 years old. Maybe it was a family member, or it could have been an uncle, or could have been a teacher that you had was a mentor, and then, or it could have been some early job you had and things like that, or experience with when you were in university, and then some of the experiences in the different roles you've had. But maybe pick the top three or maybe four inflection points that made this wonderful career you have and gave you this perspective that's so broad and deep.
well, thank you. I've never actually looked back so far into my career as to exactly what are the three motivating factors that's brought me to where I am today. But since you have already raised it, I'll probably consider looking at it. Maybe the first part would be during my childhood. Yeah, and the second part probably would be my growing up years. And then the third would be a much later stage of my career. I suppose when I was a kid, um, I think my parents were fairly easy with me. They gave me a lot of freedom. I wasn't about to say that my mom was a tiger mom and all that thing. Not at all. In fact, I thought I had a pretty relaxed childhood. I could do anything I want. And for some reason, I think it's probably got to do with our culture. I was the eldest in the family. So eldest of four children. And in a typical Asian Chinese family, when you're the eldest, there's some cultural expectation that you're supposed to take on the leading role, the leader, example to all your younger siblings. Not quite by choice. But for some reason, I also had a very deep sense of curiosity. Yeah, so when I was very young, I found quite a lot of subjects which I like a lot, and especially on history. I love to read history for, especially the world wars in China, Europe, and even Southeast Asia. And it goes back to those thousands of years, the civilization of history and all that. And for some reason, I was able to identify why certain events were happening, why certain wars was happening, and it was just purely deduction by pure inference. But as I was growing up, as with any emerging or developing countries, our focus in our education really is on science and technology. So that's basically how my educational path was sort of shaped. I was going. I mean, the deep interest is on humanities, but somehow I found myself going to mathematics, science, physics, and that sort of led me to doing quite well in maths and all that. And in fact, when I was younger, I realized that the focus on the science and the STEM, yeah, science, technology, education is so heavy going, especially in the country in which I came from, which was Malaysia. Um, in fact, it's not just me alone. All the children, all the students in my schools were highly focused in that area. So it became very competitive. Um, so I suppose the motivating factor for me as a kid was my sense of curiosity was actually nurtured, but at the same time, environment sort of shaped me to go in a slightly different, direction. But when I entered university, and I was actually I had a very strong focus on technology, on physics, maths. In fact, engineering workshop. My dad actually sent me to an engineering technical school, and I was doing a technical drawing, draftsmen and all that. And I was working in an engineering workshop, and I was all geared up to become an engineer because that's the line in which my uncles were in. We had a radio technician. I had an aeronautic engineer for an uncle, and my father was actually in science. He was working for ICI, which is Imperial Chemical Industries, and he was helping to distribute the chemicals for the rubber estates and oil palm. So there's a lot of science, tech, biotechnology kind of a focus in my family. But for some reason or another, when I went into engineering faculty, during the first 2 weeks, I had a change of heart. I had a change of heart, and that was the most surprising thing for me. I think the first 2 weeks was in National University. I was staying in a hostel, and the pressure from our orientation, we had a lot of orientation. I was staying in the hostel, and the focus was just building all the floats to try to raise monies, and we were doing anything but studying. So I was really under a lot of stress during the 1, 2 months before the school started, and during the first 2 weeks as well. And I found myself in the swimming pool under a lot of stress and pressure. And for some reason, when I was swimming and I came out from the water, I just had this revelation, a eureka moment. And I thought maybe I should get myself out from such a high intensity engineering faculty kind of pursuit and maybe take on something lighter like the humanities. And it so happened that the law faculty was available, and I was staying in the hostel where there were really lots of law professors around. And I heard a couple of my friends who actually applied to law faculty and they managed to get in. And I look at the syllabus, and then I realized law school only had about 8 to 12 hours a week, whereas engineering was like 40 hours a week. And I thought to myself, wow, you know, and at the end of the day, you can also set up your own business and you can run your own shops and all that thing. So I had that idea coming in, but I had no idea what law was all about. So I went for an interview with my lecturer, with my dean actually, and she gave me a book, Learning the Law from Glenville Williams. And I took it back, read it for a night. I actually had no idea what it was about. I went back for the second interview. And she said, okay, yeah, in. And so I got into law school. And that's where the switch from engineering focused career took place in law school in the eureka moment in the swimming pool. But I had a I actually enjoyed my studies in law. I found that even though it's a totally different field, it's very relatable to a lot of the things that we do, and that's when I realized also that law is a very cross-sectoral pursuit and discipline, and that even though I might have moved away from a very technical, focused kind of a pursuit, law actually cut across all sectors and all industry. So, from the looks of it, I don't think I've actually I found myself siloed, so to speak, because law actually goes into things like company businesses, it goes into negligence, factories acts. It also goes into things like a conflict of laws, and it goes into laws of wars, public international law, private laws, and other things. So I had a pretty good exposure. So in terms of the motivation, I guess I was just very open-minded. So during the childhood, I'm basically very curious. There's not much pressure. My parents gave me a lot of leeway to do what I wanted to do. And when I entered into law, my dad was a bit disappointed. He said, I thought you wanted to do engineering, and he actually sent me to a technical school, and I did well in the school there, but I found myself in law, and he did not complain much. He said, okay, just do whatever that you want to do. And I found myself practicing law for at least 20 years, 25 years, actually, coming up both in-house in private practice, and of course in the process of which I got married and have kids. And being a lawyer, of course, it helps with the income. I had 4 children and all that, and so the kids all grew up, and I so towards the later years and all that, I found that I had a bit more time. And okay, before that, immediately after graduating from law, I pursued all those graduate degrees you spoke about just now. So I pursued a Masters of Law in International Law, Advanced Banking, Advanced Company Law, and I also did Masters in Public Policy, which is actually a course which was designed by Harvard University in collaboration with the National University Center for Advanced Studies, which has now been renamed the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in honor of a very great leader from our country in Singapore. I went back into practice, and I started, I was practicing, and I pursued something called a master's in applied economics and specialized in development economics as well. So over the next 25 years, a lot of it was on the legal practice, arbitration, alternate dispute resolution, general litigation, corporate work, and also conveyancing and a lot of agreements, and cutting across many, many different industries, engineering, architecture, even family practice and criminal practice. It is just the nature of the work which allows us to have a whole variety of pursuits. And towards the 2025 period, of course, there was also a period of time where immediately after my studies, I actually became a journalist for 1 year. And that was the that was the other part of my career, which shocked my parents, so to speak. So I was a journalist for a short while, because when my parents realized that, you took your time to study and become a lawyer, now you wanted to be a journalist, and they had a hard time trying to process that decision. And we are a very close family, a lot of extended families. We have a lot of events where family come back together, and they had a hard time trying to explain my change of my change of so-called focus again after 5 years. And I could see I could see the pain for them trying to explain why their son is not pursuing a career which, of course, in their culture, in our cultures, is considered to be a pretty good career. So I think out of respect for my father and mother, I thought maybe I just give legal practice a try, and I stuck on it for about 25 years. Yeah, in the process of which my kids were all grown. And I think at the end of the 25 years or so, my dad passed away. Uh, you know, he was very happy. I founded a law practice. I founded a group practice, and I had an office in a very good, very good financial center in the prime area of Singapore and all that thing. After he passed away, for some reason, I was quite, quite demoralized, so to speak. And I had to spend time with my mom, who was then in Malaysia all by herself. I was then stationed in Singapore for the last 35 years. So this was the third part of my so-called change. I spent time with my mother, and I started transiting from private practice into more like an in-house practice, where I'm doing more project-based work, but more focus on businesses and companies, and a lot of them are actually former clients. And it was during that period of time, which is actually not very long after my father passed away, 2 or 3 years, I got an offer to work in Indonesia, actually. Indonesia, and this is with the ASEAN Secretariat. ASEAN Secretariat is actually the headquarters for the 10 countries that comprises ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And it was during that period of time I was actually exposed to a lot of public policy and development work at a regional level, involving all the 10 countries, but actually very global because they interact with a lot of first world, like from Europe, from America, Canada, Japan, Australia, China, India, basically because a lot of these advanced countries were giving a lot of development funds and helping to build the region as far as development work is concerned, so as to enhance the standards of, so as to ensure that the various development landscape are in line with international standards, and also to allow or to facilitate foreign direct investments of their companies coming on into the region. Yeah, so and that's basically what has happened. So I was in Indonesia, basically doing a lot of regional development work, and head of course, antitrust, and again a very new area, antitrust, consumer protection, intellectual property rights, and with a concurrent role as well as the assistant director for market integration of the ASEAN Economic Community. So we are quite different from the EU. EU, as you know, is an economic union, and EU, of course, has all their various institutional infrastructures and also legislation, EU legislation framework, which applies to all their 20 plus over member states. But whereas for us, we are just 10 countries, and it's basically on an association basis. And that's the difference in terms of our landscape. So I was there, and I went through the pandemic as well. I went through a pandemic, but I was there alone. My family was in Singapore. That well, immediately after the pandemic, that was basically not many years ago. It's only about 2.5 years ago. I'm now back in Singapore, and I'm basically focusing on a lot of consulting work, public policy, and also strategic legal advisory, where I work with international global consulting firms. Basically focusing on development work, but also with strategic legal advisory, and also drawing on the experiences which I had on the on in-house special project at advisories and that. So basically in brief, my three main motivation was firstly, as a child, I was given a lot of freedom to be curious and to do what I want to do. And you can see that over the last 30 plus over years, I've dealt with law, public policy, economics, journalism, banking, stuff like that. And then of course, growing up, of course, there's the need to be responsible. I think that's where the cultural factors come in, the expectation of parents, which I have to live up to, and you do not want to disappoint your parents and all that thing. And of course, even though they gave me the freedom, I thought I've also discharged those responsibilities for these 25 years practicing as a lawyer. And in the last 10 plus over years, of course, I'm going back to, those curiosity which got my mind wandered into history, the humanities. And I find myself doing that right now. And it's a very, it's been quite a fulfilling kind of a journey for me, even though it's of course it's quite challenging because you have to shift from one area of discipline to another. So basically, I'm quite multidisciplinary. But having said that, I must also attribute a lot of support as well to my wife. She's a doctor at private practice, a medical specialist, and she's been like, very focused in her work for the last 30 plus over years. So our family is double income. We have four children. They are all grown, and they're all having their own, just starting off in their career. Actually, the eldest is about 30 plus now. The other two is about 20, 25, 25 to 24. So yeah, curiosity, respect for parents, and basically a wanderlust.
Okay, so
Yeah.
let's go back to the very beginning. So you're very young, and you indicated that your mother gave you a lot of freedom, right? Or your parents gave you a lot of freedom, and you indicated your mom is not a tiger mom, right? So that's pretty good. And your dad gave you freedom as well, though he was more technically oriented, right? And he had kind of this engineering mindset. And you're saying that there's this kind of engineering mindset in your family. So you came from a professional family then? Like your dad was an engineer or something? Or you said there was a kind of technical aspect to your family?
Oh yeah, I think all my uncles and aunties, they are quite a few of them are in government service. My uncle is an aeronautical engineer. So, but they're all self-made in the sense that you know they work their way up through the expert certification process. Because during their time, it wasn't easy to get into the university, especially if you're situated in Southeast Asia, where all the institutions of higher learning are usually located overseas in Britain, in the US, and probably in the cities. So, and then of course, getting even just a degree is it's not everybody's aspirations anyway, because times are tough, and a lot of people during that time basically want to come out to work and earn a living, and then just build on their expertise through the work process and all that. In terms of my family, I think my father is he started his career as a teacher actually and became a and he had a short stint as a veterinarian, and then he was into research, the Rubber Research Institute back in Malaysia. It's quite true. Before he switched over to the private sector and joined ICI, which is Imperial Chemical Industry from the UK, which is an MNC operating in Malaysia, and that is a very big deal for our family because firstly, I think the salary that was being paid is quite good. So he was able to raise us, me and my three siblings, in a small town back in Perak, and we had we had everything that we needed and all that. And from his work, I could see that there's a lot of communication in terms of science and technology, especially biotechnology. There's a lot of chemicals, chemistry, a lot of communication with the head office, and a lot of publications going into the house from UK coming to our and also his offices as well. And he also emphasized a lot of education. So I remember the encyclopedias and lots of books in my home. And we actually spent quite a lot of books just reading. I mean, I actually, one of the things that I loved most reading was about the space technology and exploration, which NASA did in the US. And it was just amazing, especially when you're 8 or 9 years old, coming from a town like Malaysia and all that. Yeah. So, but having said that, surprisingly, we are now into the age of AI. We're the age of AI, and I've been attending a couple of space technology seminars, and I'm now in Singapore, and lots of technology going on, and meeting scientists and all that thing, and all these so-called experiences which you have from a kid until you're grown up, they are somehow interlinked as long as the memory is still working and all that. Yeah. So, and as far as my uncle is concerned, one of them was, he's also the eldest in the family, so he's the aeronautical engineer. He specializes in building helicopter jigs, which is a highly specialized skill set. It's not something they can just go down to factories and all that thing. And we have always admired his abilities. Yeah, so yes, there is some inspiration coming from the family, but I have no idea how the law inspiration came about. It was just me, I think, under a lot of pressure, I wanted a shorter, yeah, less work in the university, which turned out to be
So
not true because you're expected to read all the time that you have.
yeah, but you were exposed to just a lot of different kind of aspects. Your dad had a very sort of diverse career, right? With the different areas that he got involved with, ending up with ICL, but it was quite diverse. And then, like you said, your uncle in aeronautical engineering, and then you also said that at that time, a lot of it's kind of more by apprenticeship. You learn by doing, and thereby you would get very practical skills, right? And then you would get the required theoretical background just by doing and learning as you went. So it's kind of like a German model almost, right? So that's really fascinating. But it's interesting that though your dad and your uncle and so on came from a kind of a science focus, your family bought encyclopedias, and so it was which are very broad. There's a lot of breadth and depth in encyclopedias, right? You can go very broad, so that would be kind of a foundation. And like you said, your mom was very encouraging. So your mom was like a home mom, like in sort of more typical Asian culture there to nurture the kids and take care of the home or was she also working as well?
Well, my mom had a very hard childhood. I think her family went through the Japanese occupation, which happened in Malaysia at a time when she was still a very young girl and all that. In fact, it's not just her family. I think a lot of our families went through a very difficult period of time during World War II. And because of the situation in the country, of course, it sort of disrupted the normal lifestyle a lot of our so-called forefathers had to go through. And they went through a period of hardship. So for her, she had, she did not have, she had a very basic education, a very basic education. And but what she had was she knew that she had to come out to work early. And she was the eldest in the family. When you're not when you're a child, when you're the eldest in the family, if you are in a good family, you get to inherit everything, but you're in a family that struggles, you take out the whole burden. So unfortunately, she had to take the whole burden of coming out to work early and to raise her other four siblings. So all her other four siblings are doing well. One is a hospital assistant, and one is an accountant, another was a sales executive, and then her sister is also doing very well as well. But she had to work very hard to earn her keeps and yeah, at a very young age. So she went through a difficult childhood, and in a sense, maybe because of her background, uh, even though she does encourage us, but she didn't push us so hard for some reason. She was a homemaker, yeah, but she encourages in a very different way. The home is always one of the best places for me. I can go to anywhere outside the house, but there's nothing like coming back home to have the food which she cooks, and when I was growing up, she chauffeured me to school, and we are one of the few families then who had a new car and things like that. I had my private chauffeur, but it's my mother. So yeah,
Yeah,
so it's a home that's filled with a lot of love. Yeah, and I
yeah,
think
very
that's
nerd.
what was important to us. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a crucible, a very nurturing environment, and you have sort of this eclectic viewpoint, but your mom would have resilience and agility, and perseverance, because as you indicated, she's the eldest, and there's challenges, and she had to manage those challenges as the eldest, and took on those responsibilities. And I can see then when she was creating this nurturing environment, take you to school, and she was trying to create an environment where you wouldn't be burdened, even though you're the eldest, right? So maybe take some of that pressure off, and that would then again allow you to flower in terms of having this appreciation of different areas. And in school, because it's sort of cultural, you said, there was a lot, maybe science and mathematics and things like that. And that was your early maybe focus in school. And then you ended, and even including going to an engineering school for a bit. But then you're realizing that, you know what, it's kind of a little bit too stressful. I want something that's very much, aligned with my broader kind of interests. And then you ended up, and you found that law is very interdisciplinary. It's, transdisciplinary in many ways, right? You have to be an expert in a lot of different areas. And it's very knowledge based. So it speaks to your encyclopedia kind of reading time and exploring and curiosity and so I can see how that all shaped you when you were early, and then as you mentioned your progression. So okay, so you worked in creating your own legal practice, but you also worked as counsel, that is for other entities, and now you consult. You're in such a comfortable place that you can kind of pick and choose the things you want to devote your attention to. And as you also indicated, your wife is a professional, so it's like it's a very um, I mean, professional environment. So would you say that you took after your mom or your dad or both in terms of the way you interact with your kids who are all grown, or are you kind of don't push too hard, more encouraging, sort of supporting every direction or decision that you make? So did you pass on that ethos that you learned in your kids, and the same as your wife because she's a doctor, or was there more of a no, you gotta do this or that, or which path was taken? Are you the disciplinarian? Is your wife the disciplinarian?
Well, I'm actually very close to my mom, especially towards the later years, because I left home quite early. I was about 14 when I left home. But towards the later years, especially after my father died, as I mentioned to you, I went back to try to spend some time with her because she's alone in Malaysia. And I took on, I transited into more about project work, in-house consulting work, and all that thing. And from all my interaction with my mom, especially towards the later years, then I realized, wow, she's quite an intellectual. No doubt she may not be speaking to me in English. She speaks in Chinese and Chinese dialect. And then I realized her thinking and her process, her logic, I could not have found somebody more logical, someone who could reason with me so well. And I wish I could have discovered this part of her earlier on in my childhood,
Uh,
which is quite sad because somehow we always think that maybe outside world, the best experts are outside of us. And, you see them in the papers and all that thing. Without sometimes realizing and not recognizing that there are different ethos of excellence, different pathways which people could learn. And it's not necessary all just through the universities or to good projects, work and all that thing, and being well known in the market. But sometimes it's really just through the human process of going through hardship and also knowing how to manage the household, economics and expenses and all these are very simple ideas, but this is how they contribute to wealth making. And my 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 dad did very well, partly because he had very good guidance from my mother. So I think they were a very successful couple. But over at my side, over my family, yeah, sure, we have got two very strong professionals at home, but none of my kids pursued medical or lawyer or economics. Again, it's probably because either we do not inspire them, or maybe they have their mind of their own. So the eldest is basically she's into food and beverages, F&B, and she came out to work early as well because she could not focus on she did try a year in the law, a year in engineering, a year in anthropology, and I believe she probably inherited my so-called wanderlust. And next thing you know, what she's into F&B, running a restaurant and bar, cafes, and the passion was very strong. And she was working from 4 in the morning, all also almost 20 hours work, 20 hours per day she could put in. And she had minority shares in 4 restaurants over several years, and managed to sold some equity, went over to and pursued a diploma in patisserie in a French culinary institute known as Le Cordon Bleu. So and now she's back here in Singapore, managing a restaurant, which is a Michelin star restaurant with branches in Paris and London and also in Singapore. So I found that she's actually pursuing her passion and doing what she likes. Whereas my other two kids, this is the son is well, he's into bachelor in computer engineering and design, specializing in cybersecurity with a minor in AI. And just recently got a job in data intelligence. So yeah, it's again that line which he decided to pursue was an area which he actually enjoyed very much: mathematics, physics, the sciences, and he did very well. I suppose I could have maybe influenced him into that direction. I'm not sure, maybe subconsciously, because I took that path too, but then I deviated into the law. But he still focused on the technical part, and I've actually looked at the kind of work that he does in engineering, cybersecurity, and stuff like that. It's really, really very technical. It requires a high degree, and he did quite well. He graduated with high honors and high distinctions and all that. The other daughter, which I have, the youngest girl, she's got a Bachelor of Arts from London, the University of Arts London, and she focused on arts and design. So it's a fine arts degree. She did her diploma in Singapore, with the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts, and I actually helped her quite a lot. And that's when I realized fine arts was probably the course which I would have enjoyed had I, known what it was all about at the beginning. But it's not something that's readily available, especially in emerging economies where the focus is on science and maths. And she was actually quite young when she decided to focus on the arts degree, and we decided to just encourage her to do that. She was probably about maybe 14 years old when she decided to want to do arts and as a major pursuit, as opposed to science and tech. And we got a lot of discouragement even from the schools in Singapore from doing it. They were saying, "Look, don't do that because it's very difficult. Your grades are going to be bad." So, but we allowed her to go through that path, and I'm glad she went through it. And then when I sort of sort of guided her on a fine arts degree pursuit, then I realized that the fine arts is an amazing course. It's not just about painting and drawing, and it's a lot of history, a lot of analysis, a lot of cultural, social, political, analysis. It goes back to the years of history of art, and involves politics, involves economics, and it's all reflected on how paintings are being represented, a high degree of analysis and a lot of terms of arts which you need to use. And technically, personally, I think it's much more difficult than so. So she just finished, and she's 23 years old. She came out just finished last year. She got a job, but she stuck on. She was a stage production executive for a short while, but the hours were really, really, really quite tough. So now thinking, well, she's thinking about what she intends to do next. So I'm in the middle of trying to guide her, but she has a mind of her own. So I'm actually quite serious about it. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you're describing the paths of your children, but I think they are very rooted in your kind of the breadth of thinking that you have, so that it permits, and with your wife as well, it permits really exploration of any area, and then you honor that exploration. and all of them have a capacity for hard work, so that's clear amongst all of them. There's a creative element in each path they've taken, whether it's the culinary arts or the fine arts, or whether it's the art of science. There is this creativity, exploration, discovery aspect to all of them. There's an analysis part to all of it. In the culinary arts, at the level that your daughter's working at, there's a lot of analysis, right, of what works, and the fine details make a difference, right?
That's
The minutiae, that attention to detail, to be the same with the fine arts and also with your son on the AI and on the kind of the math and science side. So there are a lot of common threads there. Definitely, you and your wife have inspired curiosity, and you've encouraged whatever path they wanted to take. But I can see there's discipline in each one of those. In other words, all of them are working hard. All of them display this capacity of grit, like Angela's Duckworth, the grit where everybody has some kind of talent, but what you have to do is you have to work hard to develop skills, and then you have skills, and you have to work really hard to get some sort of achievements. But with achievement and hard work and optimism and perseverance and agility, you can then get success, and that's what's happening. So those are elements that you and your wife have inspired in your kids, and so I can see this path of breadth and depth because they all have this aspect of curiosity and breadth and depth, which you exhibit and clearly your wife would exhibit as well. So that's really, really interesting. I didn't know this about you, because we belong to a common group that's focused on more AI.
yes.
So how did you get interested in AI? And then let's get into maybe a little bit of a futuristic kind of conversation of where you think this is all going. So first of all, there's this private WhatsApp group. People get invited to it. I think there's like close to 300 people there. It's
Yeah.
very active. There's always something being posted, right? How did you get
Yeah.
invited to that group, and how did you get involved in AI?
Okay. I've, for that, I got to go back another 20 years because that was when the internet was first introduced. That was maybe in the late 90s, towards the late 90s, and I was then in legal practice. So we were still working on pen and paper. You still remember pen and paper? We had to write, and there were libraries, and there were researchers, books, and all that thing. And when the internet came on board, it got me very highly interested for some reason. I started writing articles about
I see.
technological law. Yeah,
Yeah, cyber law, right? Because you authored an
yes, that's
article on
right.
cyber crimes in the Singapore Law
Yes,
Gazette, and that was in August of 2000, I think, right? So,
correct. That's right. So it's like you need to go back 25 years. And I wrote an article, Singapore Ready for Privacy Protection Law, because at that time, the privacy protection wasn't a big subject, at least not in our part of the world. And as legal practitioners, we were wondering, what is cybercrimes? Is this a new category of crime? Or is it more of the same category of crime, but basically just in a new skin? So there were this kind of arguments and postulation that was going on, and I was one of those few people who was also writing articles about it. And I went through that process because I was just deeply curious about it. Nobody paid me to write that article, but I got it published anyway in the
right.
Singapore Law Gazette, which is basically about lawyers in Singapore and all that thing. And then from there, I started writing about e-commerce fraud because all these new platforms was coming about, and there was of course the dot-com era. There was a lot of dot-com stuff, and there was a lot of fraud going on even long time before what's happening right now with the scam. So 25 years ago, and I was also thinking about cyber terrorism at that time. We were just thinking, wow, does that mean now that you can have all these cyber attacks coming on? Of course, in subconsciously, I was already thinking about, critical infrastructure attack 25 years ago. But of course, today, now that I have the book on cybersecurity, law, governance, and compliance, which is basically about the laws in Singapore, it's basically a law to protect the critical infrastructure. So there's this long process which I went through. And I was publishing quite a few articles simply out of curiosity, and also writing about biotechnology because there's a lot of a lot of development in the DNAs and the genome and all those stuff. And I also look at it from the point of view of how people could use, you know, could use a computer to commit crimes within the household of people, like for example, grooming of young people, grooming, which is not known to be a crime at that point in time, but at other jurisdictions they recognize it, but not during our time, which is recognized now. But during that time, I was very concerned about how people could use computer, the internet, I think connecting with young kids and then started grooming them for it's sexual grooming and all that thing. So these are some of the various articles which I wrote 25 years ago, and it has always been with me, and over the years, of course, I met people of like minds as well, and we started collaborating. Started to understand what's all these issues are like. But at that point in time, these were just growing issues. It's not sort of became what it was today. And towards the so fast forward 20 plus years, one day, and of course, one of my collaborators came up to me and said, "Why don't we write a book?" He has already written quite a number of books, and he says, "Why don't you just write that law part of the tech law, which you like it?" And she is going to look into compliance side, and I said, "Okay, why don't I do that?" And I completed my part, but before we could even complete the book, I had to leave to go to Indonesia to work. So it's something which I have never not even thought about it, and that's when I was away for about 5 years, and I came back. But during the 5 years, there was also a lot of exposure on the technological aspect of development. So I sort of took part in developing the ASEAN consolidated strategy for the fourth industrial revolution. I also participated in developing the ASEAN framework for technology, the integration framework for technology for the region. And then also looking into the more cutting edge technology like blockchain, biometric identification, and smart contracts. That was like almost 6, 7 years ago. We were looking into it from the perspective of intellectual property rights at that time because we wanted to know how blockchain is going to impact the protection of intellectual properties, from how it's going to impact the protection of IP from an industry perspective, and also from a regulatory perspective as well. Because the advance of all this technology is going to change and disrupt the environment in which this registration process is going to work on. So basically, the technology part of it, again, stumbled onto my table, so to speak, because not because I was looking around for it, but because these were all projects and development plans which have been already conceived by experts, and these are international global experts, which have looked into it maybe 3 or 4 years before I came on board. And these were the so-called development initiatives which we are supposed to look into as the years go by. So when I was there, this happens to fall onto my plate, and I was working very closely with Science and Technology Division, and how we can interface our IP. In fact, our consumer protection, which I was also heading as well, because there's a lot of technological issues that concerns the concerns consumer protection, especially for e-commerce platforms. And I was also head of antitrust, so there was also the concerns about how all these new tech companies should come on board developing apps, and then of course creating data and collecting data live, and how consolidation of data and concentration of data within a small number of monopolistic players in the region, and especially at the global level, how that is going to impact the ability for other players to compete in that sphere. And which is why then I noticed, wow, data is going to create, it's going to disrupt how we're going to look at antitrust and competition law and policy, because it's no longer just about companies having brick and mortars and brick and mortar business, but it's also about the technology as well, the technology and how data, when it's being so-called monopolized and kept to just a few players, and data is so critical as far as business decision making is concerned. It allows companies who's got the most relevant data, live data collected on a daily basis to make business decision. And that's the reason why we had a lot of businesses where we started out with just one app, one ride-hailing app, and they started having businesses in so many other different sectors because they had the data to enable them to make the best business decision. Whereas those who did not have that could not even enter into the market. As a result, the barriers of entry have gone up, and that's when I started to see all this other development as the antitrust regulatory aspect of it, playing out in the business landscape. But having said that, I'm getting to the part where the AI is going to come in, because when I was in Indonesia, AI was just, I heard about AI. There was end of 2022, and I think some people were using AI in some of their work, and it was really, I begin to notice that some of the work which is coming on board, and I find that the competition is really, uh, there's some advantage in using those technology. But after I came back, I think AI sort of took off in a very big way. But during that time, I recall those work which I did on cybersecurity like 5 years or 6 years ago. And the laws then started to change in Singapore, and there was going to be an update in 2024, which is like, which is like almost like 5 years later. And it's not without a good reason, because the pace at which the cybersecurity attacks were happening, the vectors of attack have become so much more sophisticated that even though initially the laws enable the authority to empower them to protect the critical infrastructure, they realize that the powers have to be extended beyond the owners of such critical infrastructure, but also to the entire supply chain. So the and it's not by choice, because there's so many different vectors of attack, because you can have a great system protecting your critical infrastructure, but if your supply chain, your third-party vendors, they are all not protected, and worse, and they are not even subject to the jurisdictional reach of the authorities, cybersecurity authorities, then the holistic defense against such attacks would be deeply compromised. So I had my book, so-called, I updated what I work on, and then I realized I went ahead to have it published. Having said that, that was in 2020, end of 2024, which is only last year. And I had quite a lot of friends in that technical sector, and AI was coming up, and I was toying around with it a little bit. Actually, initially, I wasn't very impressed, because within 22 and 23, there was a lot of hallucination, a lot of the data were actually, and I wasn't actually impressed at all with the output. But it was almost towards I think towards the end of 2024 and the beginning of 2023, I'm beginning to see the so-called the value, and also the prospects of the importance that it has become a civilizational technology, which means it's going to impact us in all sectors of life. How did I get into AI? I had a friend who was also into cybersecurity, and she and they I think she and her friends sort of set up the Global Council for Responsible AI, and basically just invited me to sort of join in. And I thought, okay, why not? It's a growing area, and that's basically how I was pulled into it. But the moment I was pulled into it, I started writing a lot of papers, started looking at it, look at AI in so many different perspectives. Like, for example, I wrote a piece on defense, and how AI could sort of disrupt the way wars are being fought. And one of my articles actually has been, has been selected and to be published in the European by Springer and all that thing. And I started writing about how data is going to impact antitrust and consumer protection as well. So there's one chapter which has been selected as well for a publication also by Springer, by a group of local and regional academics. And this again are all related to digital and also AI as well. And I started looking into how AI could also impact our democratic institutions. So there was a paper which I wrote for a particular conference, and it basically was looking into the issue why how technology could actually diminish the democratic institutions in which we live in. And the reason behind it is because of deep fake, misinformation, and all these things happening at a time, which also requires the authorities to come in to try to contain the disinformation. And as a result, which a lot of laws which are being passed actually sort of, in a sense, sort of put a bit of constraint of freedom of speech and inquiry and stuff like that. And it has impact on how we exercise our democratic rights. And, because if you don't have full information about the environment in which you're living in, exercising that democratic right to vote would be compromised. And that's basically what I noticed has been happening as well. Because from the index of democracy, right? I mean, we have a democratic index which have been looked into over the years, and there have been some decline over the region. It could also be partly attributed to what has been happening in technology as well. Yeah, so that's how I got involved into AI, because I realized it's a civilizational technology. It's going to impact us in so many different ways, and as I write, a few of these papers and all that thing, I realized that it's not just going to impact us at our work. I mean, we've got a lot of fear about losing our jobs and stuff like that, but it's going to impact even how we're going to vote. It's going to impact how companies are going to compete, and it's going to impact even how violence could be committed against marginalized society. Because one area in which I was looking into is also gender, how technology facilitated violence against gender and marginal groups. It's also an issue which I came about partly while researching for my cybersecurity book, because I was talking to one of the international agencies about this. And they are very concerned about how technology now is being used to actually impact and facilitate violence against the marginal, the marginal communities. And another paper which I just wrote also was on data privacy and protection. And of course, the reason why data privacy and protection is so important is because data is what fuels AI, and then AI needs good data to work. And data governance are some of the areas in which would sort of facilitate the growth of AI and how countries can collaborate. But because we are basically living in a fragmented kind of legislative framework in the region, and because of my regional work in ASEAN and all that thing, I realized that for our region to be more collaborative and more competitive, there's a need to somehow have some common legislative framework to ensure that data could cross borders without different standards of protection that they have to meet and all that thing. So this is also another area of challenge which I think we are facing. But other than that, I think AI also came about. Because of what I noticed, thousands of apps which are created in the market, and there seems to be an AI for everything. And that's also the sense of curiosity going into it. That's when I realized that things like, creating a PowerPoint presentation, for example, it used to take me like 2 weeks to actually, yeah, it's quite true. When I was in Indonesia making all my presentations at a regional and international level, I had to prepare, by hand. And it took me about 2 weeks to actually prepare a really good PowerPoint presentation. But with AI right now, as long as you have your presentation up, you can actually create it within, it's very fast. So it has expedited productivity. It's enabled us to do so much more. But at the same time as well, it's also, your KPI has gone up, but your pay is probably still the same.
Yeah, I mean, let's explore some of this in more detail. So typically my interviews are an hour, but we're going to go over. because everything that you talked about in terms of AI is fascinating. So many different areas to explore. TK, and this is part of our interview now, but I'm going to request that in your profile, resubmit it as part of the interview and put links to all of the books, chapters you contributed, all the articles that you can find, things like that. If you can put that into your profile, because that's like a great resource. For example, in September 2024, you published a book titled Cybersecurity Guardians of the Digital Frontier, Singapore 2018 Cybersecurity Act, incorporating the 2000 and then incorporating the 2024 amendments. I think that's really interesting. I mean, I did a keynote, a series of keynotes actually in Singapore, one with GITEX, or was speaking. And I mean, Singapore is so far ahead, and you're part of that leadership. Um, but you provide analysis and insights into Singapore cybersecurity law and its updates. And the work has been described, it's been internationally claimed, and it really underscores the authority of tech law and data protection. And then October this year, may have the time or dates wrong, but you co-authored an analysis report on the EU's AI Act, Fundamental Rights Impact and Assessment, and examining how EU's forthcoming AI regulations will impact fundamental rights and offering guidance and compliance and ethical consideration. Those are so timely right now because the EU is finalizing its AI Act. Some people say it goes too far, but he's also you're contributing a chapter on the impact of AI on defense technology for an anthology commissioned by the Ministry of Defense of Austria, expected in this year, next year, right? Reflecting how AI would transfer military and security domains. And I think, again, so current and very appropriate. In addition, you explore the future role of AI in legal processes such as dispute resolution, pondering how AI and automation might exist or replace traditional mechanisms. I mean, there's this, and then all of your publications and research activities as a thought leader on AI governance. And because you've been doing from that August article of 2000, you wrote in cybersecurity. I mean, you've been kind of embedded in this, and that's why you've been training in or working as a trainer at the Singapore Cyber Defense Academy. And of course, you've overlaid all of this on AI and the impact it could have on on diverse populations or underprivileged individuals. And the UN has taken an interest in that because of the ramifications of marginalized populations and the impact on AI. You need to put all of this into your profile. Such a great resource. Have you done any, and we'll explore some of this more detail too, but have you done any IEEE conferences at all or things like that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've done quite a lot of conferences. In fact, I'm fresh from two AI conference which just took place last week. Yeah, the first one was the Impact India AI Impact Pre-Summit conference which
Right.
was held in Singapore. It was organized by uh, by the Center for International Law of the National University of Singapore, in collaboration with a few organizers, including BIMSTEC, which is basically a collaboration of various countries in the Bay of Bengal, including India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Myanmar, a few other countries as well. So, so that conference attracted academics from all over the world, and
Right.
they actually look into very critical issues. It's not just so. My panel was on global norms and regional collaboration. So, of course, I have a very strong background as far as the regional integration work is concerned, and sort of encourage the possibility of further collaboration between ASEAN and also the countries from BIMSTEC, partly as so as to add an additional pathway to the to the conversation that's ongoing, especially between the West, that is happening in the West and also in China, where these two dominant geopolitical forces where the two dominant geopolitical powers are actually taking place right now as far as that technological R&D is concerned. And I'm actually looking at it from the point of view of developing some kind of a regional integration from a South-South perspective, meaning the idea is to, yeah, we understand that the US have got one set of governance as far as AI is concerned, and but China have their own set. And of course, EU also, more human rights perspective, whereas the US is more innovation based. China is more holistic, but within their own ecosystem. So the idea here is to develop one more ecosystem in the South-South sector, but this would require countries to collaborate and come together. Yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, so and the purpose for that really is to see how we can somehow navigate the region among all these competing governance model without being tied down to either one of them, and therefore subject the region to dominance of any particular geopolitical powers. So the idea is to develop some kind of a strategic neutrality, which allows us to somehow collect the best governance models and apply it to our very varied and diversified region. We've got more than thousands of languages spoken in the region, diversified political system, and also the economic bases of all these countries are very different as well. So it's very difficult for us, for the countries in our South-South region to just adopt any one of the particular models which are being so-called imposed. No, not
So,
imposed, but yeah.
yeah, so TK, then in your profile, then can you put any portals or websites that about that work? Because I think it's interesting work. Also, because there's so much happening in Singapore, any Singapore based programs that and put it in your profile that you can point to. But I think the South-South framework sounds really interesting because you got these different blocks, right? But there
Yeah,
definitely has to be, each one has to be addressed in some sort of programmatic way. If you could
mm,
put links in there about that. Uh,
yeah,
um, I definitely want to recommend you now, if you haven't done a lot of IEEE. IEEE is like a conglomerate. It's a nonprofit. It's really famous, right? And they have the IEEE. They have their own standards on the use of AI, and but they have conferences all over. They do over 2,300 conferences, right? They got 250 journals. Or sorry, they got about 180 journals and about 45 sub-organizations. I think they got about 1.4 billion in assets and kind of like a reserve and about 72 million in their foundation that they can give out on grants and over 500,000 members. So, and as a nonprofit, I think their annual repeat revenue, though you can't call it revenue because they're a nonprofit, but I think it's over 650 million a year.
wow,
Yeah. So, and I've been doing a lot of keynotes for them, but I'll definitely recommend you because your expertise. And then I'm embedded in the ACM. We're number one in computing science. I've been on the board since, or board committees or chairing since 2009. Still do so. And the work I think. Well, this interview will appear within the ACM, within IEEE simultaneously. So, but your work is just so valuable. So the more you can put into your profile, because then your profile becomes a resource for the world, right? Including because I do about 6,000 engagements a year, whether it's like an interview or it could be, like a meeting with an investor or a government official or corporate leader, or it could be I just finished a private conference with CEOs. I was the only speaker for half a day. I
yeah,
did a 60-minute keynote roughly, and then about 3 hours or 2 to 3 hours of AMA where they just asked me questions, right? But I'd love to point to your work. So if you have any work that you've done that will apply to corporations and they're applying AI, and what would you recommend in terms of frameworks they should look at, or books you'd recommend, or you can definitely put the books and the articles and things like that you've written, so I can point to it, so I can say, you've got to look at TK's work at its breadth and depth, and for that matter, maybe they would want to bring you on as counsel as they, and these corporations, all of them have budget for this, right? So, but because you've been very thoughtful on this work for such a long time. Okay, so fascinating. I had no idea. It's like you're an iceberg, you know. In our private WhatsApp group, I see you posting and you're always very thoughtful, but there's just kind of 90% that's it's like a mountain of really valuable work, and it's just so appropriate and current, and people should be aware of it. I'm glad we did this interview. Because, and I can point to it because I do these things all the time. You know what? Have you done any GITEX conferences at all? I'll do an introduction to Pawan, who's their overall global director, but they hold the largest conferences in the world. Like the one in Dubai has over 200,000 attendees, right? And in fact, I was invited to do some more upcoming, but I just can't because I'm over schedule. But I'll definitely recommend you because you have the tech background, you have the policy background, the governance, the legal, and you got everything. I mean, you're like a well, you're definitely a polymath. But have you done any of the GITEX ones at all? If not, I'll introduce you to the global producer. And they literally have the top conferences in the world, and it's all about innovation. They're investment focused, but they definitely have a lot of policy in there. And because you touch so many different areas, I think you'd be such a valuable speaker or moderator or panel member. Have you done any of GITEX ones at all?
Yeah, I was recently at the Intersect Arabia at Riyadh.
Right,
Intersect, so I was invited to deliver a keynote on how responsible AI would be important and
right.
contribute to security solutions. So that was maybe in early October this year.
Okay, that's
And
great.
yeah, that's right. So right now, I've not had the opportunity to actually speak in GITEC. I mean, I've heard of them. I've heard of them. I've so-called you know
I'll
spoken to them
introduce
and
you
all that.
to
Yeah,
the overall
yeah,
global producer, and so that maybe I'll do it in WhatsApp or something like that, and just get you two to
yeah,
explore. The other thing too is there's the Dubai Future Foundation. They have a private convening. It's by invite. Um, I mean, there's so much going on in the Gulf states, so it's good that you were in Saudi, but there's UAE as well, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and a lot of things going
yeah,
there that you definitely need to be plugged into because there's just so much capital being deployed. I mean, what is it? Maybe about 7.2 trillion or 3 trillion overall in that region
yeah,
of sovereign funding. It's the highest concentration of capital, and they're very thoughtful. They think about all of the issues you bring up and the challenges, and they're deploying capital to embed tech and things like that. So let's vector a little bit because I was going to spend some time off camera to talk to you, but I'm getting such a great understanding of what you do that we're just going to make this all interview time. And so keep in mind that none of this is cut out or what
okay,
all the other thing then is, there's you see, I interviewed Jeff Hinton early this year. He won the Nobel Prize, and of course, he left Google in February, I think, of 2023. So he would feel not as encumbered, to speak freely. That's my overlay of why he left. I mean, you'd have to listen to. I did an interview where he will talk about his point of view. I did Jan LeCun this year as well. He just left Meta to go to a startup. Really interesting perspectives. Um, and because you've been involved in this so deeply and broadly, then you'd be filling with Jeff, and and his work, and both of them are considered the godfathers of AI, right? Because they won the ACM Turing Award back in 2018, which is the Nobel Prize in Computing Science. And then, but Jeff Hinton is unusual, and they got a Nobel Prize for his work as well, right? It's just, but he's been coming out saying that there's it could be an existential issue for us. Where do you sit on that? Do you think, are you an optimist, or do you think it's an existential issue for us?
Yeah, that's a very, very important question. I'm a techno optimist,
Yeah, so am
so
I.
I believe in the goodness of humanity. Yeah, notwithstanding the fact of all the horror that happened in this world and all that, and we have survived for so many years until today.
Yeah.
We had, yeah, it's true. There's the argument that we had all the nuclear weapons and all that thing, and we came close to deploying it against each other. Of course, AI has the other additional dimension, which is basically whether or not the machines could bypass human interventions in our decision making, how that's going to happen. And I think that's the main point is when responsible and ethical AI and how we intend to deploy it into our system comes in very important. But of course, it also depends on the kind of governance that AI governance that the countries are using. If we are very pro-innovation, governance may not be that important because innovation is seen is seen as one of the areas in which because there's also competition for geopolitical dominance as well. I think the existential risks. It seems like theoretically it's possible. It's a possibility, but how
It's
high is that
non-zero.
probability?
It's non-zero,
It's
right?
non-zero, yeah. But the question is, what are the safeguards? What are the guardrails that we are going to build to, ensure that the system that we are developing right now, and of course also incorporating all the new technologies that come on board, the AGI, ASI, and quantum.
Okay,
We
let me
obviously,
let me
yeah,
do an intervention. Do you think AGI is going to happen? Like you see Leopold Aschenbrenner or Daniel Kokotallo, they're sort of predicting, and they used to work for OpenAI, and they're doing other things now, and they both have published that, AGI could happen in like 2028 or 2000. Do you think it's going to happen? And maybe we are in the middle of AGI. We just don't know it until we have a historical perspective looking back. Because when I interviewed Jeff Hinton, and again, people can look at his exact words, but this is my impression of what he said in my our interview with him, and that is that if we went back 10 years, we would have thought what's happening today. It's probably like they would have never had anticipated what's happening today. They would never have thought it's happening now. They would have thought it would be 2050 or 2100 or something. So, if you went back 15 years and you showed them all the things that's happening in AI, people would have thought that's AGI, right? But now, because so do you think AGI, like in this kind of fantastical way, or ASI is going to happen within the next 5 years? Do you think it's a 2035?
the projection and the timing keep getting shorter. I've
Yes,
been
that's
hearing
true.
it like 10 years, 5 years, and I was just off another AI symposium held in another very advanced country as well. And the guy who's leading it says it might happen next year.
That's true. Yeah, yeah. You're like you have Anthropic CEO. I mean, he's pretty bullish that's going to happen pretty soon, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
I mean, he's
Yeah.
concerned, but he's or yeah. So or Sam is probably more near term, right?
Yeah, I suppose for me, my focus has always been the humanities angle, the compliance, the governance, the regulation, the framework. Of course, we understand the technology. So a lot of the guardrails have to be built, of course, in consultation as well with the technologists, the guys who created and developed the
Right.
computing aspects, the algorithm and stuff like that. And that's why I think there's a need to, I mean, we are multidisciplinary, but we also need to somehow merge both the engineering scientific minds and also the compliance mind as well. I've spoken to a lot of my friends who are engineers, And the last thing they have in mind whenever they are innovating a new product is to think about compliance. That's the last thing in their mind. So
Right,
and I was glad I did a keynote in Riyadh recently
right.
through the Intersect Arabia, and it's for the Future Security Summit, which is basically for the civil for defense and security and stuff like that, and basically to highlight the importance of actually incorporating responsible AI governance and compliance in the development of the system. And lo and behold, at the end of my talk, there were quite a few, very there were quite a few questions being asked, and they wanted to know who should be involved in all this. You're going to
Yeah,
get so many body involved, and we are, the entire project is still going to take off. And then at the same time, how are you going to implement that? So the
right.
question really is in the implementation and the details. I think there is a general thought process that it's important to have responsible AI. And in a sense, being the global AI ambassador for Global Council is actually founded by a lot of cyber security specialists who has been in the business for the last 20, 30 years. And it came about because they were very concerned about how AI is disrupting their landscape and disrupting their business, and the vectors of attacks are now changing in so many different ways. And they thought that, wow, we better have make sure that whoever that's developing the AI, we are not going to develop a rogue AI, but one which is going to be responsible and adhere to ethical, compliance and rules and guidance and all that. And that's how it came about. And within so it's less than 2 years old. It's less than 2 years old, and we just launched our Singapore chapter, a couple of months back, first in Asia, so to speak. But we're already in about 78 countries. That's the amazing part about the concern which I think the population and the people genuinely have about how AI is going to turn out. And I think Jeff Hinton is probably correct that there's this existential concern, but we need to do something about it, keeping the human in the loop, maybe a kill switch, or at least a meaningful human participation in the entire process. But I'm not sure how long we can actually do that. And can we actually develop some kind of a benign, sentient, loving AI?
Well, Jeff, I think Jeff lately is saying maybe give it maternal instincts. So it thinks of us as a child, right? And you know how mothers are always typically not, but typically are very protective of their children, right? Even though they're superior.
Yeah,
That's an idea that I saw him, not in our interview, but I've seen him lately talk about this. That's really interesting. This Global Council for Responsible AI was founded by kind of people in the cybersecurity community interested in saying, you know what, this is a big deal and we need to address it in some way. Are the members of this Global Council for Responsible AI, are they government plus academia, industry? I mean, how does one how did this, like, who are the members of this council? And you said, 78 countries and things like that. Like,
yeah. I think a lot of them were formerly cybersecurity professionals.
right,
So I'm just guessing as to why it was formed, because when in Singapore, we also contacted a lot of information security professionals. And AI actually is quite a recent phenomenon. So technically speaking, I don't think there are that many AI experts unless they've been working on it for the last 10, 15, 20 years. So it
right,
was an area of expertise which came about quite recently. And so a lot of people who are involved in it, those who are genuinely concerned, were seeing that their, security landscape are being disrupted. Because
right,
even for myself, I was looking at it from a cybersecurity angle, and the
right,
cybersecurity attacks in hospitals, looking for data, and then ransomware attacks, stuff like that. And that presupposes, a hacker in the background, but things are changing. I understand things are changing. With AI, the vectors of attacks are it's just growing exponentially. But I was also told that the technological defense that is available is still there. But I think things are still evolving even as we speak. So that's why there's a need, because I don't think all of us actually really understand the extent and the impact that AI is going to have in our life. We are still like, I believe we are still scraping the surface of what it can actually do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I just came back from New York. I did a private, as I mentioned, ended up being about an hour keynote, and then there was a couple hours or more of AMA, and the focus was what I call the S10, these 10 converging technologies and the impact they're going to have on everything. The title of my talk was The Future of Everything in the S10 Shift Era, but quantum was part of that. There was a lot of interest in quantum. It just so happened back in 2015, I was asked by a group, actually the top 100 CEOs of financial services, to kind of assist them in realizing the future through investments and innovation, looking 10, 15 years into the future. One of the areas I brought up to them was quantum, even back in 2015. And then a few weeks ago, I was invited back by these financial service leaders or people in that community to kind of advance my thinking on quantum and its implications. And in my keynote, and this is public information, so I can't share what was taught privately, but I mean, publicly, 80% of the top 50 banks are already exploring in pilots or proof of concepts quantum, both on the defensive side or on the offensive side, actually using it. And JP Morgan would be a good example, right? And you saw, and JP Morgan has been on this journey since 2015 anyways, right? Both in the what they call Q-Day, where quantum computers can break encryption. So they're way ahead in implementing, testing, what they call post-quantum cryptography in a variety of trials and kind of live production oriented in practicing crypto agility and on the offensive side, like portfolio optimization, derivatives, things like that. So um, uh, JP Morgan probably accounts for about 50% of all of the activity. So 80% of the top 50 banks are definitely involved. And so because you're in cybersecurity and your Q-Day is where quantum can break encryption, right? And
yeah,
now there's some thinking that it's going to happen by 2035, right? And there's this thing called Moscow's theorem, which is X plus Y. If it's greater than Z, you have a problem. And X is the length of time a long-lived data. Y is the time it takes to impose a post-quantum cryptography algorithms, which already exist throughout your enterprises in your supply chain, which is about 5 to 7 years. And you've added to the date which you start doing this. And if it's greater than 2035, you have a problem. So if you started this year, you get 2042, which means you're vulnerable, right? And because banks are so heavily regulated, the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank of banks, they've even having testing live post-quantum cryptography across countries with Swift and Nexicolt and things like that. And they put out all sorts of requirements now for central banks to cut over, right? And then governments around the world are requiring, it's mandatory. Federal agencies in their supply chain have to cut over. The US started 2 years ago. Canada is starting on this journey. April is a deadline for next year, 2026. So there's a huge cybersecurity exposure element, and the future of quantum is not quantum; it's quantum with classical computing mixed with AI. So it's hybrid computing, right? That's
yeah,
why NVQ Link from Google, I mean not from Google, but NVQ Link from NVIDIA, which is open architecture, uh, or Q2Q, which is an open architecture. That's why it's all focused on integration of or hybrid computing, right? Classical with quantum and AI. Because quantum has this cyber security harvest now decrypt kind of element. Is your Global Council for Responsible AI looking at this? They should be, because government mandate, the Bank International Settlements is mandate. There's a nonprofit formed by the financial services industry called the Financial Services Information Sharing Analysis Center. They got roadmaps, they've got working groups, they got table exercises. They're working with cloud providers. I mean, it's like code red. It's like everybody, you better get on board because it's not an IT problem. It's a systemic risk issue, right?
Yeah.
Have you looked at it, or if not, I represent the Global Council on Responsible AI. They've got to look at this, and
Yeah,
it's near.
so even as I'm speaking, they have developed a framework to assess AI. It's to somehow ensure whether or not it's able to satisfy a lot of criteria on whether or not all the guardrails are sufficient for the purposes of developing them. This framework is in the process of being discussed.
Okay, that's
About,
great.
I think, a month ago, they had a first draft done in Lake Como when they met. And second round is going on in Tokyo. So there's a Tokyo forum that's ongoing right now. And
But have you published the drafts? Is it like
not yet. It's still being worked on by all the members in the council.
okay.
Yeah. So we're getting all the inputs and all that thing.
Well,
And
can you
once
put
it's
the
done,
yeah, but can you put the website then in your profile for the Global Council for Responsible AI
oh
so that
yeah,
people could
I can put
track their work?
I can put a website there. That's not a problem at all.
Okay.
But back to the issue of quantum. Yeah, so there's a lot of companies in Singapore right now, quantum proving a lot of their systems, so to speak, to ensure. And I don't know, I don't actually know exactly how that is being done, but from what I've discussed with my cybersecurity specialists friends, there is a way in which they are trying to quantum proof their system so that in the event if all these things is happening, yeah, it's not going to result in an automatic password failure for their various systems. So in a sense, one of the questions I asked them during the talk which they gave us about the importance of quantum proving, and these are all cybersecurity information security professionals from lots of business to be made. I was just asking them to think back the time in which we had a similar situation. This was the Millennium Bugs. If you recall, it was in the year
Right.
2000 Millennium Bug. I also had an article on that as well.
Right.
And we were very concerned whether or not is that going to happen. And of course, years and without much incident, of course, with hindsight, everybody was saying, look, if you had not done all your entire process, ensure that it was millennium bug free and stuff like that, you probably would have resulted in a lot of catastrophe to the
Yeah, that's
computing
right.
system. So there is always this concern also whether is it being I won't use the word overhyped. Yes, I think the technology is there, but we also need to somehow balance it up with with what are the kind of steps that we are going to take to mitigate the fallout in the event if something like that were to happen. I
Yeah, but
still remember
governments are mandating all federal agencies cut over. They have
yeah,
absolute deadlines. Europe has it, UK,
correct. Yeah,
Canada, the US, China would
absolutely.
have it, Singapore.
Yeah,
Singapore, they actually they've been running trials with all the banks, all your major
yeah.
banks there, the top banks,
Mm,
to making sure that they are starting running trials on quantum
yeah,
key distribution and things like that. So,
yeah,
so they definitely are not. I mean, but it can't be just banks and government agencies, including all of the supply chain for the federal agencies around the world will be required. They're mandated by policy. They're going to be mandated to have to, otherwise they won't be able to do business with government, right?
yeah.
And as I mentioned, the banking
Mm,
sector is definitely treating this very, very seriously, right? So, which means everybody should be looking at this. And the NIST put out a call for algorithms back in 2015 to address it. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the U.S. And then they've been putting out sort of interim work so that people could start cutting over or start piloting. And then the three final standards were released in August of last year. And so the final standards, and then they got backups coming on online as well. And And quantum key distribution has been out there for a while. So the two kind of major ways of protecting businesses are there, but post-quantum cryptography is very mature. The standards are finalized, backed by NIST, and they're being adopted globally. The exceptions are South Korea. They're kind of going kind of like what NIST is doing, but with their own requirements. And the other is China. They have their own cryptography standards, but they're doing it. So uh, uh, I don't think it's not treated as hype. It's pretty serious. And as I mentioned, I spent a day with banking leaders because of the earlier work I had done, and then they reached out and said, "Stephen, can you spend a day with us?" Which I did, and laid out roadmaps, laid out who the players are, gave them ways to access inventory, how to do a cryptographic inventory. Cryptograph, a lot of times when people hear that term, they think it's about Bitcoin. No, this is about assessing where you're using encryption and where you're vulnerable. And there's tools that are out there now that can do an assessment or help you do an assessment of all your vulnerability. And then you start picking the ones which are the most sensitive, start running sandbox experiments and then pilots. And then you got to clearly set up a governance structure for this, right? A risk governance structure, and then you start rolling it out. And HSBC has been doing this. As I mentioned, I would say JP Morgan's probably one of the most advanced in running this. And they did a trial in Singapore, a public trial in Singapore. And so they've been running a number of trials. And this is with the Singapore telecom infrastructure, right? So where they did a data center live using multiple standards to see if it'll run and for 45 days, I think. Um, anyways, I just thought I'd bring that up because you've got this global council of responsible AI, and this is could be a bigger, or it's going to definitely be an interesting issue, right? So,
Yeah. Well, I
um,
think yeah I think you're probably very on point as far as the technological advancement is concerned.
right,
It's uh, it's just amazing what we are witnessing at this point in time, how technology is transforming society at every level, and
right,
how even within the tech industry, their competitiveness and you know how their own softwares and their systems, their AI systems are being changed every 6 months, sometimes even 3 months. You have a new version coming out, and every new version that's coming out is not just marginally or incrementally better than the
that's right.
previous one. It's geometrically better, and which is why it's just amazing. Yeah. So we
I
are we are
mean,
we are already straight into agentic AI. So
yeah, I mean,
yeah,
you saw OpenAI release 5, and then they went
yeah,
5.1, and then Google came out with Gemini 3 Pro, and then the whole world looked at what Google did, and they're saying, okay, it's over. Google's now in the lead, and then like literally like a week and a half or 2 weeks later, then Gemini comes out. I mean, OpenAI comes out 5.2, and 5.2 is pretty
yeah,
good. I mean, and this is like three updates in 1 year, right? And I mean, it's incredible. In fact, multiple updates within a span of a few weeks. And like you said, each time an update comes up, they're not minuscule. They're significant updates. Or DeepSeek, or you see Sakana out of Japan, which has an American footprint. Even the whole open source movement has changed, right? It was like Llama was way out in front and Mistral, and then all of a sudden this DeepSeek comes out, and then the whole world changes, right? Because they think, oh, China's way behind, and then you find out, no, they're not so far behind, right? And it's, I mean, I'm glad you're there looking at policy, and you got this deep tech background, but also the legal and the policy and responsible AI practice background. Just one kind of final question then. I mean, just to kind of wrap it up, what would be your recommendations to the audience and questions? So, what recommendations you want to leave the audience? So, I'm going to leave a recommendation. The audience has to look at your profile because you're going to have all these links, which are going to be useful, actionable areas that they can use in their execution and deployment and thinking about what's happening. Singapore definitely is a world leader in many aspects. So, anything you can point at from Singapore in your profile. So what recommendations you want to leave the audience? And I guess the other thing is what questions you want to leave the audience, questions that the audience should ponder as they consider the future.
Well, I think because I had a bit of an experience in regional integration work, so I would recommend, I would highly recommend the importance of getting out from a silo-minded kind of a perspective
Right,
in the
yeah,
way we are doing our work. Of course, it should have been, at this stage, everybody have to be somehow multidisciplinary. And there's also a need to interface with all the various different divisions and sectors of the industries. Because for some reason, AI has sort of empowered us, has enabled us to actually attempt areas which we dare not go into. And
right,
in in that sense, it has made us, well, it's empowered us. Uh, It, I'm not sure whether it has made us smarter, but it has made us more efficient in dealing with knowledge and core domain expertise and all that, so that we are able to see a broader and bigger picture. So the interfacing and the sectoral collaboration must be encouraged, not only just at an industry level, but also cross-border as well. Because the whole idea of digital economy is a paradox because it's supposed to be borderless, but our entire legislative infrastructure was built upon a brick and mortar society like a
right,
thousand years ago. And it's totally incongruent with what we are supposed to be doing. And
right.
there's a we just uh, we just have to continue collaborating with the region so that one day, when we look at the digital economy, there's only just going to be one unified, harmonized legislative system that's going to govern how we as an country we are and not like right now. A lot of the hurdles are actually infrastructure which has been in place, which need to be broken down. And that itself leads to a lot of societal analysis as well as to roles of government, how the big tech is going to.
So TK, you're fading out for some reason. So
Yeah. So
so so what I'm hearing, and so I'm going to kind of restate what you've indicated, and that is that we have this kind of brick and mortar siloed mentality from thousands of years of doing things, but the digital economy should be that those silos shouldn't be there. I mean, that's the whole point of digital, right? Where you integrate, you're seamless, and you can optimize, and there's efficiencies with that, and definitely you get a interdisciplinary kind of thinking, right? Or transdisciplinary, and and uh, and digital will enable that. So one of your recommendations is to embrace that aspect, right? Think of a broader conversation. Go beyond just your niche. Embrace. So that's. I think I summarized that part because you were fading in and out. Did I get that right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's basically what how technology is going to empower all of us. So in terms of the question that we need to ponder upon really is to it's to we have to address our anxieties about technology. You'll be surprised that I was one of the last person to use a handphone. It was a long time I was using the landline until there's no more public phones. And then I was really forced by circumstances to get a 2G phone. In fact, it wasn't a 2G. I think it was a 2G, but before that there was a pager, and it was a bit of a mental barrier. But once you break that, then you're off to go. And I think a lot of us have this reservation as well about technology because it's moving too fast. It's just moving too fast, and this is a personal struggle for humanity. as a whole. So there's a need to somehow, somehow address our anxiety about technological changes. And then, so the question that they need to ask themselves is, how could they maybe relate to peers and encourage each other to move on at a gradual, incremental pace? Because there's a gulf here. It's an emotional gulf which we need to overcome. Because once that's overcome, then we can deal with technology a bit better. It's both intellectual and also emotional struggles.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of inertia with people, right? So, how do you get them into sort of combinatorial thinking, and how do you get them into sort of looking forward and embracing things? And then, of course, so asking those questions, and then I guess the other aspect is think digital and embracing the interdisciplinary or a multi-stakeholder aspect. Multi-stakeholder is kind of an older idea than interdisciplinary is more of a modern, then transdisciplinary is even a further step forward. But, TK, I do about 100 interviews a year and been doing them for 5 decades roughly, and about 1,500 since the year 2000. But now I do more every year because of digital, right? And with Zoom, it's so much easier. But this is one of the longest interviews I've done. So I appreciate you staying the course. I mean, we had really, my interviews are typically an hour, and this is like almost 2 hours. So, you do such great work, TK. I mean, thank you for coming in and just sharing the depth and breadth of your experience and your servant leadership of serving the world to make it better. So I appreciate you just describing so much about your whole experience from the early age to what you're doing now. And I look forward to getting the updated profile because that'll be released with the interview. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Stefan. This is a very deep honor on my side, and very grateful for your kind words and everything. And it's also helped me to open up and to think more deeply about my own life as well. Great interview. I really enjoyed it very much.
Okay, well, let's continue the interaction and engagement. So thank you again.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.